Welcome back, everyone. This is the third and final module in the MBA Essentials for Lawyers course. Once again, I'll ask everyone now if they put themselves on mute and stay on mute just to start off with. But we are going to be having breakout sessions and workshops to make this as interactive as possible. Of course, please feel free to unmute yourself at any point if you have any questions. We also have time at the end for questions and answers. So what are we trying to achieve on this course? We'll provide you with an understanding of these core strategic models, tools, skills, and concepts that are at the heart of an MBA course, which can very quickly and easily use to answer any client, business, industry, market, look at how that marketplace is changing, but also perhaps preempt changes within the client market so we can align our legal advice to client strategy, but also look at how we apply the same frameworks to our own market and go on to develop the best strategies possible. And we'll look at 7 core frameworks in total on this course. We looked at 4 frameworks so far. We'll have a recap of those in a few moments. Look at 3 additional frameworks today. And of course, understanding these principles is of growing importance within the legal market. And one thing we want to emphasize in today's session is the importance of continuing to revisit these concepts, reapply them to your clients or to your own business. We'll see today that no business, no law firm, no client can afford to rely on past success just to carry it into the future indefinitely. If it even attempts to do that, it almost inevitably go into decline and follow this trajectory known as the sigmoid curve. So we'll see today, in order for any business, any law firm, any client to be successful in the long term, you have to reinvent itself at point A on the sigmoid curve, while when it's staying fast in the face at point B. And of course, this rate of change is increasing in just about every market, a few more so than the legal marketplace itself. New technologies, Gen AI, clearly can have a transformative impact on the legal market. New types of competitors often driven by these new technologies, changing customer and client needs, partly hybrid working, people working from home on a regular basis, changing working patterns. The second referred to as Reven's law, which is really just common sense. It says in order for any organization to survive and be successful in the long term, the rate of learning internally must be at least equal to the rate of change within the external marketplace in which the business operates. So we need to become a learning organization, understand how our own market and client marketplaces is changing, think how do we respond to those changes with well-developed plans so we can continue to grow for the future. And we look at this today in the context of the general layer or general environment. Okay, let's start again. Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is the third and final module in the MBA Essentials for Lawyers course. Once again, everyone now if they put themselves on mute and stay on mute just to start off with, but we are going to be having breakout sessions and workshops to make this as interactive as possible. Of course, please feel free to unmute yourself at any point if you have any questions. We also have time at the end for questions and answers. So what are we trying to achieve on this course? We'll provide you with an understanding of these core strategic models, tools, skills, and concepts that are at the heart of an MBA course, which you could very quickly and easily use to analyze any client, business, industry, market, look at how the marketplace is changing, perhaps even preempt changes within the client market, and go on to develop the best strategies possible. Welcome back, everyone. This is the third and final module in the MBA Essentials for Lawyers course. Once again, I'll ask everyone now if they put themselves on mute and stay on mute just to start off with. But we are going to be having breakout sessions and workshops to make this as interactive as possible. Of course, please feel free to unmute yourself at any point if you have any questions. We also have time at the end for questions and answers. So what are we trying to achieve on this course? We'll provide you with an understanding of these core strategic models, tools, skills, and concepts that are at the heart of an MBA course, which you can very quickly and easily use to analyze any client, business, industry, market, look at how the marketplace is changing, perhaps even preempt change within the client market, but also apply the same frameworks to our own market and go on to develop the best strategies possible. And we'll look at 7 core frameworks in total on this course, and we're going to do that with a dual perspective, practically how we apply it to the client, but also our own business. We've looked at 4 frameworks so far. We'll have a recap of those in a few moments, but look at 3 additional frameworks today. Something I really want to emphasize in today's session is the importance of continuing to revisit these concepts, reapply them to your own business or to a client. We'll see today that no business, no law firm, no client can afford to rely on past success just to carry it into the future indefinitely. If it even attempts to do that, it almost inevitably go into decline and follow this trajectory known as the sigmoid curve. So we'll see today, in order for any business to be successful in the long term, It's going to have to reinvent itself at point A on the sigmoid curve, rather than when it's staring disaster in the face at point B. And of course, its rate of change is increasing in just about every market, few perhaps more than the legal marketplace itself, new technologies, Gen AI, clearly already having a transformative impact on the legal market. New types of competitors often driven by these new technologies, changing customer and client needs, clients becoming increasingly sophisticated, and then saying what work can be streamlined, optimized through new technologies, and various other changes client needs we'll look at today, changing working patterns, hybrid working, not just for lawyers, many clients themselves working from home on a regular basis. The second phrase was Reven's law. It's really just common sense. Says in order for any organization to survive and be successful in the long term, the rate of learning internally must be at least equal to the rate of change within the external marketplace in which the business operates. So we need to become a learning organization, understand how our own market and client marketplaces are changing. Think, how do we respond to those changes with well-developed plans so we can continue to grow for the future? And this is what we'll be looking at today in the context of the general layer or general environment. But before we do that, let's have a quick recap just to see where we've got up to so far. So in module 1, we start off with the industry layer, the industry environment. We said it's possible to analyze any industry by breaking down to the 5 component forces that determine its profitability, namely bargaining power buyers, bargaining power suppliers, rivalry among existing competitors, threat of new entrants, and finally threat of substitutes. So we said the inherent profitability of any industry is determined by how its profitability is bargained away by buyers as they push down prices, driving down profitability that way. We said this one tends to be at its strongest in those industries where buyers purely make the decision about who to buy from, purely on the basis of price. So we said strong in US short-haul airlines where passengers tend to choose who they fly with, purely on the basis of price. How its profitability is bargained away by suppliers that drive up the cost to the business. Here, asking questions such as, is the business reliant on one or a few suppliers? Is it dependent on a skilled workforce? Remembering supply includes supply of labor. We think about the competitors in the market. Who are they? How intense is competition? What are we fighting over? But we also think about the existing competitors. We have to consider how difficult or easy it might be for new competitors to enter the marketplace. What's the threat of a new entrant? There's also about those existing and potential competitors. Are there any substitute or alternative products or services from other industries that provide similar benefits or similar outcomes? And we said using the framework in this way is really useful when it comes to understanding why one industry, such as the soft drinks industry, is so much more profitable than the short-haul airline industry. However, moving forward, when it comes to developing strategy, we said we start need to use more modern terminology, which encourages us to think about the nature and characteristics of these forces so we can go on to address them strategically. So moving forward, rather than think about the bargaining power bars, from now on, we say we're trying to understand the characteristics of those bars, usually now referred to as characteristics of customers. So there's key questions. What factors are really important to the customers or clients when they choose who to buy this specific product or service from? Similarly, in relation to suppliers, what are the characteristics of those suppliers? Is the business reliant on one or a few suppliers, but dependent upon a skilled workforce to deliver this particular product or service? In relation to competition, what's the nature of competition? Who are the competitors? Could we provide a unique or superior product or service feature? How could we perhaps stand out from the crowd and differentiate ourselves from the competitors? In relation to threats of new entrants, what's the nature of barriers to entry that will determine how difficult or easy it is for new competitors to break in? How important is reputation? Anything we do to boost their reputation and raise barriers to entry that way? And finally, what are the characteristics of these substitutes, who are usually now referred to as characteristics of alternatives or replacement products or services? What benefits do they provide? Could we adopt some of the benefits, our own benefits, and those of the alternatives? And we said towards the end of module 1, it's only having gained an understanding of these industry characteristics, we're then in a position to identify the types of strategies we might be able to use to address them, selecting strategies from these 5 predefined lists that correspond to our industry forces. We said all too often we can rush in with the solution without actually understanding the nature of the problem. So that's why we try to set up as step 1, understand the nature of the problem. So what's important to the customers within the market? Okay, it's not just about prices, other things are important. This is what drives up costs. It's these skilled employees, it's this raw material, it's this IP that runs in, it's what the competitor up to and so on. We can then say, well, based on my understanding of these industry characteristics, these strategies might be appropriate to address our forces. Then last week in module 2, we looked internally and said, well, before we're really ready to identify the best strategy for a specific business within the industry, we need to understand where that business is positioned in the market in terms of the customer needs it seeks to prioritize. Something which can be diagrammatically represented by drawing a strategy canvas, where on the x-axis we set out all of the factors that are important to the customer, so the customer needs set across the x-axis, and the vertical y-axis represents the level of investment in each of those various customer needs, where a high score in relation to any given customer need means the business invests a lot in that need, that's what it prioritizes. With the one exception of price, that high score price means high price is expensive, a low score means it's cheap. We looked at a few examples of this. We looked at the hotel industry. We said that at least these are some of the facts important to people booking a hotel industry: room sizing, facilities, lounges, gym, and so on. Your 4 to 5-star hotel heavily invested in these needs, but charges a high price, high price, high price. Whereas a 1 to 3-star hotel doesn't invest quite so much, but at least they'll be a fair bit cheaper, low score, low price, low price. But then we've got hotels such as Ibis globally. What they say is for their target audience, they're staying overnight on business or perhaps one night for a wedding. It turns out they're not all that into great eating facilities because they're probably just not going to be eating there. They're not into lounges and gyms. They just want a bed to sleep in for the night, but they still want a good level of hygiene, good quality bed and a quiet room, but because not really investing much in these, they charge a price similar to the 1 to 3-star hotel. So we said the strategy canvas helps think, well, who are our target customers? Which of their needs are we seeking to serve? What standard of work is deemed to be acceptable? What are you trying to prioritize within our market? We looked at a range of other examples. We looked at Nintendo with the Nintendo Wii games console. They focused on the family audience who didn't care so much about high quality graphics or complex games and wanted the easy to play, fun games that any member of the family can pick up. We applied this to IKEA, tend to focus on younger furniture buyers who want style at low cost, want to be able to take the furniture away with them the same day and do so cheaply. But don't care about the fact there's a limited level of customer service. And we said we could apply it to the legal market. So for that one, we'd narrow down to a specific type of work. Think for this specific type of work, what factors are going to be really important to the client in relation to that specific type of work? A great way of communicating lots of information internally, ensuring all on message, we're all on the same page. And this clearly varies depending upon the type of work we choose to look at. So step 1 is portrait of our forces, step 2, strategy canvas, and then and only then we're ready for strategy selection, step 3. So we said we should now use our strategy canvas as a guide to influence and color our perspective in terms of which strategies would be appropriate for our business in addressing our industry forces. Selecting strategy from this 5 predefined lists that correspond to industry forces. But we said we only do that having understood these industry characteristics and what we're prioritizing. At that point, we can only go through this more specifically for our business. And then and only then we're ready to start thinking about the assets we need to have in place. So we think, nice idea, to how we want to win customers, reduce costs, overcome competition, and so on. But to do that, we need to have these physical assets in place. There's plant, equipment, stock, premises, real estate, hardware, and so on. We need this money in the business. There's knowledge, skills, talents of our people, our human resources, organizational assets, so agreements with third parties and intellectual property, and finally, process habits, habitual ways of working, and so on. So it's only having gone this, we start to identify key assets. We looked at 2 case studies on this. We looked at IKEA. We focused on the supply strategy of getting the customers to do some of the work for them. And we said that were driven by these sorts of assets: design processes, flat pack, modular design, easy to assemble, highly skilled furniture designers, huge stores, everything set out in a particular way, and so on. And we said we could apply this to the legal marketplace. For this one, we focus on a different supply strategy, that supply strategy of maximum resource utilization. How to ensure our fee earners using their time as effectively and efficiently as possible. We said it was driven by at least some of these assets: delegation, IT, support staff, and so on. So 4 frameworks so far. So portfolio forces step 1, strategy canvas step 2, strategy selection step 3, and IKEA set maps and functional strategies step 4. And the final point I made right at the end of the last session is where business is selecting strategies that are consistent with their strategy canvas. It helps the business to ensure that where it would like to be positioned in the market. So this represents our design position. So where we are selecting strategies that are consistent with our strategy canvas, it helps the business to ensure that where it would like to be positioned becomes where the business is actually positioned in the market as perceived by the customers, otherwise referred to as the brand identity of the business. Not a new frame, which is a natural consequence of us doing step 3 properly. Where we are selecting strategy consistent with our strategy canvas, our design position becomes our brand identity. So far, so good. If the world never changed, a business could continue to pursue the same strategies using the same internal assets indefinitely. But we'll see today, well, of course, the world does change. From time to time, we see changes in economic conditions, fashions, taste, trends, laws, regulations, technologies. So we have to understand how we interpret and respond to those various changes. That's what we'll look at today in the context of the general environment. And in doing this, we're going to go through a further 3 steps, which will be step 5, 6, and 7. So then the first 4 are portrait of 5 forces, strategy canvas, strategy selection, our KSM maps and functional strategies. So step 5 then is going to be, how do we interpret the general environment, or more specifically, changes within it? And look at this, we'll look at 2 connected models, something called the future 5 forces model, and its connected model, the future brand identity model. And this will look at the importance of continually scanning the general environment, looking for weak signals of changes as they begin to show up, so we can respond at the appropriate time on the sigmoid curve. So we'll look at the sigmoid curve in a bit more depth. So by the end of step 5, we actually looked at all 3 layers: the industry layer, the industry environment in module 1, the internal environment last week in module 2, and the general environment then the start of this module 3. And when you think then, how do we respond to the changes and build for the future? Not just to survive, business reports don't just exist to survive, but in order to prosper and grow. And look at this, something called the resource-based view of change, the resource-based view of long-term strategy, it's sometimes called. But for our final step, our corporate strategy, and for an even stranger name, sweet spot of opportunity. Okay, so let's get started on today's content, so the general layer or general environment. So if you remember, I very briefly mentioned the general environment at the start of module 1. It says made of all of these external factors that do not specifically sit within the business's industry, but that will still be extremely important for the success of the business. It's actually made up of a huge range of factors, more factors are the industry or internal environment. So here we think about factors such as, but not limited to, economic conditions, interest rates, house prices, unemployment, fashions, taste trends, demographics, attitudes to work, attitudes to free time, attitudes to ethics, attitudes towards the environment, politics, laws, regulations, technologies, and so on. And once again, then, because there are so many factors for us to consider, we need to use some sort of framework to help us conceptualize these factors, just to provide some sort of structure to our thinking in the development of strategy. And by far the most popular and powerful framework used to capture these sorts of facts actually comes by a variety of different names, all of which are acronyms. If anyone's heard of an acronym that's used to capture just some of these factors, just type those into the chat. I say it might not be the same name I'm going to use, but I say there are variations on names. If anyone's heard of a framework used to capture those sorts of factors, just type those into the chat. Okay, well, the one that I'm going to use, I say there are variations on the name. I'll come on to those variations in a few minutes, but the one I'm going to use is a PEST framework, where PEST is short for political, economic, sociocultural, and technological factors. So the first thing to note about each of these 4 headings is they're much broader than their first sound. So political, as well as covering political policies and political processes, it also covers laws and regulations. So from now on, all laws and regulations will come under this very broad heading of political. Economic, this is broader still, as well as covering factors such as economic conditions, interest rates, house prices, and general economic health. It also covers factors such as the infrastructure, such as road and rail networks, and the availability of natural resources. So the second thing to note about this, the first was they're much broader than their first sound. The second thing to note, that every country has a different general environment. Clearly, different countries have different availability of natural resources, different infrastructure, different economic conditions, different political systems, different laws, regulations, and so on. S, sociocultural, covers factors as fashions, taste, trends, demographics, attitudes to work, attitudes to free time, attitudes to ethics, attitudes towards the environment. Perhaps the broadest of all the 4 headings are that or economic. And finally, T, levels of available technology. Sometimes see a PEST referred to as a step, so same factors but just in a different order. So sociocultural, technological, economic, and political. And sometimes referred to as a PESTLE, so the same factors again to start off with: political, economic, sociocultural, and technological. But this time the legal facts being extracted out of political and just begin their own standalone heading, the L for legal, and the ethical and environmental factors being extracted out of sociocultural and be given their own standalone heading, the E for ethical and environmental. In fact, sometimes they separate out ethical and environmental and 2 separate E's, in which case there are 3 E's, economic, ethical, and environmental, in which case they call it a steeple. If any good at anagrams or countdown, you might work that out. But from now on, we'll refer to this as a PEST framework for no other reason. This is one of the most commonly used names for this framework, but it will make no difference whatsoever if in the future you want to do a step, a PEST, or steeple, or any other name you can come up with. They all cover exactly the same set of factors on the right-hand side, albeit those factors might come under different headings. So it doesn't matter which headings you use. It's not the clever bit, we'll on to the clever bit in a couple of minutes. But so they all cover exactly the same set of factors on the right-hand side, albeit factors might come under different headings. But we're going to choose one. So we choose a PEST framework, say for no other reason, it's the most commonly used name for this. So moving forward today, laws and regulations will come under the heading of political, and ethical and environmental facts will come under the heading of sociocultural. And the third and final thing to note about these headings, so the first was they're broader than they sound. The second one, every country has a different general environment. The third thing to note is they're all subject to change. Laws change, economic conditions change, fashion change, technology change. And of course, whenever we normally think about any kind of change within the general environment, or more specifically within the political, economic, sociocultural, and technological factors that make up the general environment, we usually just think about those changes in terms of their direct impact on the individual business. Or to set this out in a slightly different way, in this way. So normally if there's a change in government or some new law, regulation, which said comes under the heading of political, we usually think what will be the direct impact perhaps on the change in the law, on the client, or the client needs to respond to comply with that change in the law. Similarly, change in economic conditions, a boom time, a recession, how those things directly impact on the business, perhaps a recession, the business have to cut costs, to restructure in some way, change in fashions, taste, trends, what will be the direct impact on there? If there are new technologies, or the business need to adopt these technologies, integrate them into their business and change workflow process and so on. And of course, carrying out this exercise is going to be extremely important. However, and it's quite a big however, it forms the basis for the first half of this module 3. It's one of the most important points on this course, if not the single most important point. In order for us to really be able to interpret any change that take place within the general layer from a strategic perspective, in addition to us thinking about their direct impact on the individual business itself, we also have to interpret them in broader, more relative terms, and their impact on the business's industry, and more specifically on the 5 forces at work within the business's industry, which are of course characterized by Porter's 5 forces. So as we'll see through a range of examples, if there is a new law or regulation, which we said comes under the heading of political, as well as thinking about the direct impact on the business itself, we also think about the impact on the business relative to its competitors, or could be impact on suppliers, on their customers. How could this raise or lower barriers to entry in the market? So say, for example, a marketplace is deregulated, all the laws are stripped out. A client might say, yippee, less red tape for us to have to comply with. Of course, the downside of that is it lowers barriers to entry, causing heated competition. Or the flip side to that, let's say we're looking at a fast growth market, something like fintech, and a new regulation is introduced. A client might say, what a nuisance, another regulation for us to have to comply with. Of course, the downside to that is the upside to that, it puts off new and raises barriers to entry in the marketplace. What about the alternatives? Often subject to very different rules and regulations, very different looking industries often. We said, for example, within US short-haul airlines, when the alternative there is video conferencing. So they're often subject to different rules and regulations. What's going on in that space? So think about these things in relative terms, changing economic conditions, a boom time, recession, how do those things play out in relative terms? This can be quite counterintuitive, well, as we'll see that they all can. Changing social cultures, fashions, taste trends, how do those things play out? And find changes in technology. Where do these perhaps lower barriers to entry or introduce new sorts of substitutes or alternatives and reduce costs and so on? We'll have the first breakout on that one, where you'll think about some historic examples of where that's taken place. But as we'll see, if we do not consider change in these more relative terms, we can very easily misinterpret the real implications for the purposes of the development of strategy. And to help highlight this, and we're going through examples for each of these, actually can start off with economic and work our way around clockwise, finishing off with political, where we start thinking about laws and regulations. So economic. So here, just with all of the changes are relative. So whilst, for example, most businesses will suffer during a downturn or a recession, some businesses will struggle more than others, and therefore business can often take advantage of an improved bargaining position relative to its industry forces as a result. So for example, a type of supplier that's often harder hit than most during recession, where business get more for its money. So then by suppliers, we're talking about anything responsible for driving up the costs of a business will come under the heading of its suppliers. So this includes the staffing costs, marketing, advertising costs, raw materials, cost of real estate, plant equipment. So any inputs into the business, anything the business have to pay for will come under the heading of its suppliers. And there's some categories of suppliers which usually disproportionately hard hit during recession, where business get more for its money. For example, a landlord, business often bargain down their commercial rents during recessions. Another type of supplier, which is always disproportionately hard hit during recessions, where business get more for its money from that category of supplier, would be an advertising agency, marketing and advertising agencies. Of course, businesses tend to spend much less money on marketing and advertising during recessions, and consequently then, business often get a lot more money from a marketing agency during a recession. So for example, so during recessions, those agencies have to work much harder to fill TV slots, radio slots, magazine space, news space, win internet campaigns. Consequently, business often get a lot more for their money. So for example, during the 1990s, a recession gripped the US at the time, but in spite of that recession, Dell Computers famously continued to heavily invest in marketing and advertising, so taking advantage of those lower advertising costs from that category of supplier at the time, which in turn allowed them to gain market share over their two main competitors, who at the time were Hewlett-Packard and a business called Gateway Computers. So when the market came back, they were then in a much stronger position. So how can we take advantage of improved bargaining position relative to our industry forces, even during a recession? And this concept then led the co-founder of Intel, a guy called Gordon Moore, to make the following point about recessions. He said there are actually 3 rules to recessions. They always end. You can't save way out of them, but that means there's always a financial risk of making an investment. Everyone's well aware there's a financial risk whenever you make an investment, but equally, there'll be a competitive risk in not investing, in that some competitors will invest, and consequently then some businesses will emerge stronger than before. So of course, during a recession, business might have to make cuts in some areas, might have to restructure, but you should also remember the recession will come to an end, and yes, there will be a financial risk of continuing to invest in potential future areas of growth. There'll be that competitive risk in not investing. And later on, this module 3, we'll look at an example of this. 2 different businesses in the same industry hit by a recession responded in very different ways with very different outcomes. But the key headline point in this one for now was we're well aware there'll be a financial risk whenever you make an investment. We have to be mindful of the fact there'll be that competitive risk in not investing. And of course, as well as interpreting recessions in relative terms, we have to interpret any improvement in economic conditions in relative terms. So generally a great thing, of course, to see a booming economy. We have to be careful as it plays out in some areas. So the flip side to the previous examples, well, booming economy can now see our suppliers drive up costs. Landlords charge more rent, commercial rent. Employees more and more in their pay packs. Advertising costs go up and so on. Something else that happens during boom times, new entrants find it easier to raise finance during booming economic conditions. That can often lower barriers to entry in the marketplace, causing heated competition and so on. So we think about all these things in relative terms. Next, social culture trends. This is fashions, taste, trends, demographics, attitudes to work, attitudes to free time, attitudes to ethics, attitudes towards the environment. So in terms of due to a change in the social culture, a product or service all of a sudden becomes extremely fashionable. And the existing investors think, wow, this is great, our marketplace is finally taking off due to this change in the social culture. What happens then is a load of new competitors are also able to rush into the marketplace, raise finance to break into this now fashionable market, lowering barriers to entry, then causing heated competition. This happened to Filofax in the 1980s. I don't know if any of you remember Filofax, but those bound, I've got an example in here, those bound personal organizers. So Filofax has actually been established in 1921. So I don't know if anyone remembers those bound personal organizers. It was quite a niche product, not all that popular. But during the 1980s, there's a change in the social culture and the rise in what were referred to at the time as young urban professionals, young upwardly mobile professionals or yuppies, who, as it turned out, really loved personal organizers. So it looked like it was going to be this boom in demand for personal organizers. In case actually you never saw your typical 80s yuppie look like, there you go, your typical 80s yuppie. Very busy, some might say self-important individual, got this information to deal with. What do you do with this data? You couldn't store it on your phone back then. That would be ridiculous. Phones were just for making phone calls. So what do you do with some of the information? You use your Filofax. So Filofax is short for file of facts, which is irrelevant for this course, but I thought it was quite interesting. So Filofax thought this is fantastic. The marketplace is finally taking off. But what happened then was a load of new competitors such as WH Smith rushed into the market their own version of the personal organizer. These are generally better run businesses selling cheaper products with more innovative features. Inbuilt calculators, and if any of you remember those, thereby causing a huge amount of competitive rivalry within their market. So paradoxically, perhaps this boom in demand for personal organizers during the 1980s almost put Filofax out of business. They survived, but did not benefit in the way you might thought they should have done. So the other thing happened during boom times to the overall detriment of profitability, our supplies now become proportionally more scarce. Perhaps we find that hard to get hold of the raw materials now we need to meet this boom in demand. That drives their costs, or the skilled employees. Again, they become more scarce, drives up salaries, drive up costs, drive down profitability. So again, we think about these things in relative terms. Next, then, technological factors. So this is going to form the basis for the next breakout group. So what I'm going to do is put you into breakout groups. What I do is come up with as many examples as you can, either historical, things that are happening at the moment, of where technological factors have impact on each or any of those industry forces. You don't have to go through all 5, just focus on perhaps 1 or 2 of these. So you can think of any examples, either historical, things that are happening at the moment where new technology perhaps allowed a business to reduce its costs, often reduce their workforce, perhaps as a result of a new technology. Remember, supply includes supply of labor. Or can you give any examples where perhaps a new technology as adopted by one competitor, they're given a huge lead. They've blown the other competitors out of the water as a result of adopting new technology. Some nice examples of this one historically. If you are going to focus on one, perhaps this is the best one though. Well, examples of where perhaps a new technology has introduced all sorts of new substitutes or alternatives, perhaps things that traditional competitors hadn't seen coming. or there's some examples where they've lowered barriers to entry in the marketplace or have an impact on customers. So you can come up with your new groups, and we'll ask one group to feed back to us. Again, if that group could, that spokesperson, to nominate a spokesperson, if that spokesperson could just give us some examples, some examples they discuss in their group of where the technological factor disrupted each or any of those industry forces. I say you don't have to go through all 5 forces, focus on perhaps 1 or 2 of these. So what historic examples are there where they've disrupted, technology disrupted each or any of those industry forces? Again, about 4 or 5 minutes to have a go at this. Again, you want to spend the first minute just to introduce yourself to the other people in a breakout group if you don't all know one another, and spend the remaining 4 minutes coming up with some example. Okay, and if you can put your cameras on again for the breakout groups. So these ones I've come up with. So for this one, so suppliers. So often businesses introduce new technology to reduce the workforce. You see this with self-checkout in supermarkets. We sell self-checkout airports, so helping them that strategy. So allows business to reduce their overall costs, introduce all sorts of strategies there. The obvious one here, automated manufacturing plants. AI clearly have an impact on workforce in many markets. So all sorts of examples of this one. Sometimes a competitor gains adopts a new technology that blows competitors out of the water. We saw this in the mobile space where Nokia and BlackBerry were the dominant players. Then, of course, Apple comes along with smartphone touchscreen interface, followed by Samsung, someone heavily disrupting that market. Alternatives, but this is the best one. So all sorts of things here, streaming, like Netflix placing video hire, iTunes or Spotify placing traditional music stores, email replacing post, typewriters being replaced by word processing. So all sorts of examples in relation to this one. Amazon replacing high street bookstores. Lots of examples here. Phones replacing use of cameras, alarm clocks, torches, GPS, handheld gaming devices, music players, and so on. They can offer lower barriers to entry in the marketplace. So, for example, fintech, lowering barriers to entry in that marketplace. Just using things such as Amazon Marketplace or eBay allowed traders come into marketplace without the need of any high street premises, lowers barriers to entry there. And you've got all sorts of things impact on price comparison sites and so on, impacting on customers. So all sorts of things here. And finally, perhaps most interesting of all, political, which of course includes laws and regulations. But there's a bit of a backstory to this particular one. So when Porter's 5 Forces was first being developed at the end of the 70s and start of the 80s, a number of academics said that Michael Porter had in fact got this wrong. Now, it should in fact be a 6th force, namely political, government, laws, regulations. Of course, whenever we normally think about any kind of change in the law, we usually think about the direct impact on the individual business, think how should the business respond to comply with that change in the law. However, more recently, Michael Porter and other academics have said, well, actually, this is the wrong way of thinking about this. This is not a 6th force. There are indeed just 5 forces. It's generally accepted now that this is not a 6th force. There are just 5 forces. Because what they said was, yes, of course, we have to think about how a law impacts on an individual business. But we do that for all of the best factors. They have to think about how economic conditions now, such as fashion, taste, trends, and technologies directly impact on the business. But in order for us to really be able to interpret any of those changes, including a change in the law from a strategic perspective, we also think about these things in these relative terms. And this is what Michael Porter said about this particular point. So government is not best understood as a 6th force because government involvement is neither inherently good nor bad for industry profitability. The best way to understand the influence of government on competition is to analyze how specific government policies affect the 5 forces. For instance, patents raise barriers to entry, boosting industry profit potential. Conversely, government policies favoring unions and remembering supply includes supply of labour may raise supplier power and diminish profit potential. Bankruptcy rules that allow failing companies to reorganise rather than exit can lead to excess capacity and intense rivalry. Government operates on multiple levels of the main different policies, each of which will affect structure in different ways. So whilst most lawyers are trained to advise our clients simply in terms of how the law will impact on them directly, most of the strategic management literature would suggest that in addition to this, we think about the implications for these other industry forces. So for example, how might a new law not just impact on my client directly, but on my client relative to its competitors? As we saw in Module 2 with Step 2, the strategy canvas, different businesses in the same industry commonly prioritize different customer needs. And because of that, they'll pursue different strategies at Step 3, and then almost always have a different mix of key assets at Step 4, different people, different processes, different real estate, different locations, different mix of IP, and so on. Consequently then, because these businesses look so different internally, the same law will have different implications on different businesses in the same industry. And a new law or regulation that at first appears to be a costly nuisance for a business to comply with could maybe provide that business some sort of competitive advantage if it finds it easier or cheaper to comply with than the competition. Of course, everything is relative. So let's say, for example, there's a new minimum wage law that's going to raise the cost of every business within an industry. That law will in fact have less of an impact on a business that has always relied on having automated manufacturing plants and processes in place than it will perhaps on a competitor that's always relied on having a cheap workforce in place to keep its costs down. And this is true in terms of any law. People often say law, that's one thing that impacts on businesses in the same way, but it never will, not unless they're startups with hardly any assets, otherwise they'll operate quite differently internally. Perhaps there's a new strict privacy law, whereas a business company holds its data locally, but you apply that, then the business sends out their data internationally. Laws around corporation tax. Which jurisdictions is the business based in? Can it farm profits out to the most favourable jurisdiction? How might that change in the future? R&D tax credits, laws around COVID, wage subsidy, furlough laws, again, had varying implications depending upon the workforce within those different businesses. Laws around Brexit and so on, where the business traditionally sources workforce and materials. Laws, green policies, the business ahead of the curve in relation to those sorts of things. So think about the law in this more relative way, allows us to apply our knowledge, our skills in this much more sophisticated, strategic manner to provide the same advice to every business within the market. Now we can start being much more bespoke, much more fine-tuned. It has an impact on my client, perhaps in a slightly different way to the competitors. Imagine how powerful it would be if there's a new regulation, and once in the same newsletter with the same email to every client that has an impact on, we now put a paragraph in the email to say, I've actually thought about this relative to your competitors. I actually think you're in a better position or worse position, or perhaps we have to be honest, we don't know. It'd be good to sit down and discuss this. It really demonstrates to the client a willingness not to tell them what the law is, but work with them, think about the strategic implication is relative to their competitors. Imagine how powerful it would be if in-house counsel takes that to the board and doesn't just say, yeah, our lawyers have told us the law, but working with them, think about the strategic implications. I know from my own experience, in-house counsel, I'm sure some of you have in-house counsel experience, in-house counsel is often viewed as a cost center within the business. We don't play a key strategic role. So perhaps we can give them the ammunition to raise their own profile internally, demonstrate why the law has these strategic implications. And of course, it's not about the impact of the law on the client relative to its competitors. What about the other industry force? Such as a new regulation that has no direct impact on the client or its competitors, but maybe impacts on one of their suppliers. Maybe wouldn't normally have thought of this, but having carried out our Porter's 5 force analysis, step 1, we've by now listed the various suppliers to this client. You might say, actually, there is a law that's going to impact on one of my client suppliers. Could I forewarn my client about potential rise in the cost? Perhaps the supplier's going to pass the cost on to that client. Could we forewarn the client about that if we're aware of what's going on within that space? Or if they're in the business-to-business marketplace, what laws impact on their customers? Again, if they're aware of this, perhaps they could work more closely alongside their customers, help them to comply with that law while the customer's squeezing them on price. Or, as I mentioned at the start, the marketplace is deregulated. Looks great, but can lower barriers to entry in the marketplace. Or new laws in fast growth markets. Sometimes a good thing, put off new entrants. Or what about the alternatives, often subject to different rules and regulations? What's going on in that space? So I mentioned, think about the law in this more relative way, allows us to apply our knowledge, our skills, in a much more sophisticated, strategic manner. However, to provide that level of advice requires an understanding of those industry characteristics and what's unique about the business within the market. So we can start to understand why this course and why an analysis has to be structured in this order. We have to understand those industry forces, which we looked at in module 1. Before we're going to start to identify what's important internally in addressing those industry forces, we looked internally last week in module 2. And we have to understand what's important internally, and more specifically what's unique about the business, so we can interpret any of these changes in more relative terms. So a quote in relation to this: so because a regulatory change can affect an industry structure, a company must ask itself, are there any government actions on the horizon that may influence the structure of my industry? And here's the important bit. If so, what's the change due for my relative strategic position, and how can I prepare to deal with it effectively now? Managers who take a proactive approach to regulation are more likely to convert constraints into opportunities. I often deliver the same course to in-house counsel. On the end of the course, I ask people, what are the key takeaway points from the course? And this one almost always comes up as a key point for them. If there's a new regulation, why not just tell the business the impact directly on the business? Let's start thinking about this in more relative terms. And a key way which you can stand out from the other law firms and differentiate themselves from our competitors. All law firms will do something similar as a new regulation, but now it can start being a bit more bespoke, a bit more fine-tuned, personalized for the specific client. This is something of growing importance within the legal marketplace. Of course, now we can use Gen AI. If there's a new legal regulation, perhaps type something in. It doesn't take long to generate an article on the impact of a new regulation. What AI can't do is provide that much more personalized, nuanced approach, which requires a deep understanding of that specific business relative to its industry force. So a key way in which we're going to be able to stand out from the crowd in the future. I think this is put really nicely in an article from the American Bar Association last year, and this is how it explains this idea. So one of the crucial aspects of differentiating oneself as a lawyer through written communication is the ability to distill complex legislative changes into digestible and actual insights for clients and their businesses. In a landscape soon to be awash with an abundance of AI-generated content that may lack uniqueness, lawyers need to craft well-structured, concise, and personalized written material stand out from the crowd. This human element, the ability to clearly articulate and guide based on informed opinions, will differentiate legal professions in the fast-approaching deluge of written information. So again, using these frameworks to have that nuanced, personalized view of the client, their strategy, their market, their key assets is going to be essential. So we're not just doing something generic that AI can do, we can provide that personalized advice to the client. So whenever there's a change in the law, or not just law, anything political, change in government, we have to think about these things in these relative terms. And policymakers have to be aware of this, of course. Sometimes we see things that have unintended consequences. As mentioned, some of the minimum wage laws have unintended consequences, boosting some businesses other than others. We've seen this sometimes where there's been some sort of tax on luxury products intended to tax the customers, but that's had a more negative impact on the low-paid workforce within the industry. Sometimes we've seen government policy subsidizing agricultural products, but all that's led to is less competition and an oversupply of certain products within the marketplace. So sometimes we get this distorted view. We've seen in the UK, the government has tried to subsidize buses, thinking that people more like to switch from driving to the alternative of using a bus, but that people generally haven't seen that as a bus as substitute to driving. So hasn't had that benefit. So policymakers need to be super aware of the dynamics in relation to this. So whenever we see any change in the pest factors, we think about those things in relative terms. So we don't just look at what the 5 forces look like today, what would it look like in the future, therefore referred to as future 5 force model. We'll come on to this concept later on, but we should be trying to identify weak signals in these factors and think how might they play out in this industry level. I'll say more about that a bit later on. So whenever we see a change out here, we think about those things in relative terms. When we see some sort of big event, so it could be a big weather event, it could be a hurricane, an earthquake, it could be a drought, it could be a pandemic, so it includes things such as COVID, not just COVID, but any of those sorts of big events. We see these things as things that sit outside the general environment. And then in interpreting these events, the first thing we just think, well, how will they first of all impact on the pest factors? And then stage 2 of this, how will that now play out at industry level? How will it impact on my 5 forces? So, for example, the spread of COVID starts to spread internationally. Large corporates have people whose sole job it was to think, okay, well, how will that impact on political conditions locally? Will we see a lockdown? Will we see wage subsidy, furlough laws, and so on? How will that drive economic change? Perhaps a lockdown, was it a temporary recession within the local market? Social conflict, which includes working hours, will people then be forced to work from home? We see increased investments in technology such as Zoom, Teams, and so on. And then, having done that, how that play out? So, for example, in some markets, say, well, how will that impact on the workforce? People forced to work from home on a more regular basis. What about, how does that impact on us relative to a competitor? We've already got the IT infrastructure in place that will allow people to work from home. We've already got laptops and so on. How will that impact on our relationship with customers and clients? In some firms, they say to me, actually, if we've got a better relationship with our clients as a result of hybrid working. We rarely met our clients in person anyway, but now we're meeting them. We occasionally pick up the phone, of course, but wouldn't meet them in person. But now with Zoom, Teams, and so on, we're kind of going into the homes and saying, look, there's a saxophone there. I didn't know play that, or kids running, dogs barking. There's a more personal human relationship with their clients as a result of this. What about winning new clients though? Is that harder now if clients are themselves working from home on a regular basis? Perhaps they're less inclined to attend an in-person networking event. What about barriers to entry? Is it the case that in the future, firms won't need to have such big real estate in city centres? Does that lower barriers to entry in the marketplace? What about alternatively more virtual firms and so on? So we think about these things in relative terms. So we're going to have a go now applying this actually to the legal marketplace. So we're going to focus really on hybrid working, which is really a combination of these 2 factors, sociocultural and technological factors. Just to complete the picture, whenever there's change in any of the factors, again, relative, economic change, always relative in the legal market. A recession usually has a more negative impact on boutique M&A firms than it does on firms that have employment teams, insolvency teams, restructuring teams, and most obvious of all, if there's a new regulation, It's going to benefit those firms to have specialists in that area. But all these things are relative. But we can have a go at this now on hybrid working, as mentioned. And what you're going to be discussing in the next breakout then is, first of all, do you think it's here to stay? Or do you think in a few years it's going to be back to everyone back in the office 5 days a week? Assuming you think it's here to stay, what are the benefits and challenges around hybrid working? And how perhaps businesses start to address those challenges? It's been around for a while now, so any ideas in relation to that one? And then what's been your experience working with clients, either existing clients or winning new clients? Do you feel you've got a better relationship with them? Has that helped? Or about winning new clients? So it'd be great if you could discuss this on your groups, and it'd be good to hear back from one of you. Okay, so we think about these things in relative. So don't just look at the 5 forces today, how these things play out in the future. So how does this fit together? So pause on force step 1, strategy comes step 2, strategy section step 3, and our key asset maps and function strategy step 4. And of course, if the world never changed, the business could continue to pursue the same strategies in the same way, using the same key assets indefinitely. But now we're saying, well, hang on a second, the world does change. And from time to time, see changes in political, economic, social, cultural, and technological factors, which will impact on our 5 forces. We just saw through all those examples, the future 5 force examples. And because our industry characteristics have changed, have we got the right strategies in place? And if our strategy changed, have we got the right key assets? We've got the right people, we've got the right processes, right real estate, right technologies, and so on. And we'll think about how we revisit these things in a few minutes. But before we do that, I also need to recognize these pest factors, as well as impact on our 5 forces, can have an impact on the brand identity of the business. So what am I talking about here? Well, as I mentioned at the end of module 2 and the start of module 3 in the recap, businesses should be selecting strategies that are consistent with their strategy canvas. That helps them to ensure that where they would like to be positioned in the marketplace becomes where the business is actually positioned in the market as perceived by the customers, the brand identity of the business. And businesses actually work very hard to meet the needs of the customers and attain their desired brand identity. So far, so good. The only problem is customer needs don't stay static. They change over time. Past facts often introduce new customer needs, often things the business had never even thought of. And if the business hadn't seen these changes coming, they wouldn't invest in these needs, and that can have a negative impact on the brand identity of the business. So what am I talking about here? So let's say we're thinking about the car manufacturing industry a few decades ago, and think about things that used to be important to people buying a car. There might be the size of the engine, number of doors, family friendly. And we said there's no right answer in relation to this. A high performance sports car will have had one position, a family saloon another, and so on. But car manufacturers in general didn't even used to think about how environmentally friendly the car was, how sustainable it was. And any car manufacturer that hadn't seen those changes coming, they wouldn't have invested in these new needs, and that will have had a negative impact on the brand identity of the business. So in addition to thinking about how the pest factors impact on the 5 forces in general, more specifically, we have to identify if there are any new or emerging customer needs. What that brand identity look like if we just carry on as we are at the moment? So in addition to thinking about how the pest factors impact on the 5 forces, future 5 forces, we also think about the impact on the brand identity of the business. Are there any new or emerging customers? What the brand identity look like if we just carry on as we are at the moment? It's referred to as the future brand identity model. Perhaps a better name for it would be the future customer needs model. It's all about identifying new or emerging customer needs. But referred to as the future brand identity model because it creates that sense of urgency. So what brand identity is going to look like if we just carry on as we are at the moment. We need to incorporate those new needs into our thinking. And of course, we need to apply the same concept to our own market. In the legal market, I said last time, these are at least some of the factors that are traditionally important to clients. We said over the last decade or so, this has changed. Other things become important. The ESG, diversity, use of technology, use of AI now becoming more important to clients. They look more work to be streamlined, optimized. So again, other things we need to identify. This is the other one I mentioned. Knowledge of the client, mentioned this last time briefly, of growing importance within the legal marketplace. Again, as more and more law firms use similar or the same AI tools, how do we stand from the crowds, again, provided by that nuanced approach to the client? We looked at the quote from this from Bloomberg last time. And of course, AI frees us up to do that more strategic work, move away from the more routine piece of work to understand the client strategy and so on. So I've got another quote on this one from Bloomberg says, AI technology enable so as to focus on higher level aspects of the work, shifting away from repetitive and time-consuming tasks. So how do these things fit together? So pause on force is step 1, strategy comes step 2, strategy section step 3, and our key asset maps and functional strategies step 4. And we said if the world never changed, the business could continue to pursue the same strategies, using the same internal assets indefinitely. But now we're saying the world does change from time to time. We see changes in economic conditions, so political conditions, economic, social, cultural, and technological factors impact on our 5 forces and disrupt our brand identity by creating those new or emerging customer needs. So step 5 is how we do interpret change. Step 6 now, how do we respond to these various changes? Well, what we need to appreciate in relation to this is that no two businesses are alike. So we've seen changes have the impact on our 5 forces and on our brand identity, and therefore we have to go to revisit everything in the business. Revisit our strategy canvas, incorporate those new needs on the strategy canvas, how much you want to prioritize. There might be some new needs we don't care about. We don't want to prioritize them necessarily, but at least we've incorporated them and considered them. Because our entry characteristics have changed and our customer priorities might change, we revisit our strategies and start thinking about if we've got the right key assets in place to execute those strategies. We have to revisit these things sooner rather than later. Just have a think about that again. So how do these things fit together? So we said, and now we're saying pest impact on our 5 forces and disrupt our brand identity. So we have to think step 6, how do we respond to these various changes? So we have to revisit, recognize we have to revisit our strategy canvas, incorporating those new needs, how much we want to prioritize those new needs, because so we said the pest facts impact on our 5 forces and disrupt our brand identity. Because of these changes, we have to revisit everything. If we incorporate those new needs onto our strategy canvas, revisit our strategies and identify key assets. So we have to revisit these things sooner rather than later, at point A on the sigmoid curve, rather than when we're staring disaster in the face at point B. So this is where we'll look at the sigmoid curve in a bit more depth. So the sigmoid curve is used to map a number of phenomena within the business environment. Often you show a product life cycle, an introductory phase when new products introduced into the market, a fast growth phase, more people start to adopt this product or service, a maturity phase, the market starts to become more saturated, and then a phase of decline. And those of you with a science background will know the sigmoid curve applies just about anything in science, nature, and the universe as a whole. But as we'll see in the business environment, businesses need to, if they can at least, start to make the appropriate changes close to point A on the sigmoid curve, rather than when they're staying disaster in the face at point B. And the best quote that helps us sum up what the sigmoid curve is all about point A and point B, comes from Charles Handy, the co-founder of London Business School. And this is what he said about the sigmoid curve from point A and point B. So the world keeps changing. It's one of the paradoxes of success that things that got you where you are seldom the things that keep you there. The sigmoid curve sums up the story of life itself. We start slowly, experimentally, and falteringly. We wax, then we wane. It's a story of product's life cycle and of many corporations rise and fall. It even describes the course of love and relationships. If that were all, it'd be a depressing image. See, to consequently to start a new curve before the first one peters out. The place to start that new curve is point A, where there's the time as well as the resources and the energy. That would seem obvious were it not for the fact that at point A, all the messages coming through to the individual or institution are that everything is going fine, there would be folly to change, and everything is going so well. Or we know of change, but personal change or taking on organization tells us that the real energy for change only comes looking disaster in the face at point B on the first curve. So what it's saying is we need to, if we can at least, start to make the appropriate change close to point A on the sigmoid curve, rather than when we're staying disaster in the face at point B. So understand this whole process of industry evolution, whereabouts we are on the sigmoid curve, takes on critical importance in the development of strategy. Because the cost of reacting strategically, that cost increases as the need for change becomes more obvious, and the benefits of the best strategies are greatest for those first businesses to select them. But understanding whereabouts we are on the sigmoid curve, in fact closer to point A or point B, is a real art, and some businesses are much better at this than others. Many businesses use something called scenario planning, where they constantly scan the general layer, looking for weak signals of changes as they begin to show up. Think, okay, if that change really was to take hold, how might that then play out at industry level? And by that I mean, how will the 5 forces respond to these various changes? So let's say, for example, we look at this. See, scan the general, look for weak signals of changes as they begin to show up, think how that change then play out at industry level. How will the 5 forces respond to this? So let's say we're looking at an industry and there's a new technology that could dramatically lower barriers to entry in the market. All the businesses start thinking about early on in relation to this, perhaps developing, investing in that technology as themselves, take on the best people, trying to develop an industry standard, a strong reputation in relation to using that technology. The business doesn't necessarily have to trigger any of those plans yet. They might not flow into the marketplace in the way we're expecting, but we know how long things take to happen within any organization. The sooner we let these start discussing these things closer, ideally to point A, the more likely we'll respond to those various changes. Ideally, I say closer to point A, really fictional point A, but rather when we're staying disaster in the face at point B. I say fictional because in reality, almost every business responds closer to this point B, but still an important concept designed to wake managers up to the fact we can't rely So let's say there's new technologies that could dramatically lower barriers to entry within the marketplace. What will the business start to think about early on in relation? Will it start investing in that technology itself, recruiting the best people, developing industry standard, perhaps strong reputation in relation to use that technology? The business doesn't have to trigger all of those plans yet. It might not flow into the marketplace in the way we're expecting, but we know how long things take to happen within any organization. The sooner we start discussing these things internally, the least the more likely is to be able to respond at least a bit closer to point A on the sigmoid curve, rather than staying disaster in the face at point B. And there's a point out that's really fictional, that this point A. Of course, in reality, almost every business responds closer to this point B, but still an important concept which has just been designed to wake managers up to the fact we can't just rely on our past success just to carry it into the future indefinitely. We have to reinvent ourselves based upon changes that take place within the market. And the best way we do that is by continually scanning our marketplace, discussing with people within our own organization, perhaps in different departments, different jurisdictions, perhaps even discussing things across organizational boundaries. That will give us the breadth of information necessary to identify these things early on, hopefully respond a bit closer to point A. So let's have a think where we've got to so far. So we looked at how we interpret the general environment or changes within it. So how to change political, economic, social, cultural, and technological factors, impact on our five forces, future five forces, and are there any new or emerging customer needs? What our brand identity look like if we carry on as we are at the moment? We have to identify these things sooner rather than later at point A, rather than staying disaster in the face at point B on the sigmoid curve. Before we move on to step 6, step 7, how we respond to these changes, let's just quickly see how the previous 5 steps fit together. So pause our force step 1, strategy comes step 2, strategy selection step 3, and the key asset maps and function strategy step 4. And we said, well, we are selecting strategies that are consistent with our strategy canvas, our desired position becomes our brand's identity. So far, so good. If the world never changed, a business could continue to pursue the same strategies in the same key assets indefinitely. But then we said, well, the world does change. From time to time, we see change in political, economic, social, cultural, and technological factors, which will impact on our 5 forces. We saw through those examples, and disrupt our brand's identity by creating new needs. So step 5 is how we interpret change. Step 6 now, how do we respond to these various changes? Well, what we need to appreciate is that no two businesses are alike. Different businesses prioritize different needs, pursue different strategies, and almost always have different mix of key assets of how they execute those strategies. Consequently then, because no two businesses are alike, no two businesses should respond in the same way to a change that takes place in the general environment. And every business should ask itself, well, how should we respond to these changes in a superior, more feasible, or just less costly manner than the competition, based on what we are really good at as a business in terms of the strategy we're good at executing, but more importantly, in terms of our key assets. So what we should never do is just start out with a blank sheet of paper and have some sort of knee-jerk reaction to a change that takes place out in the general environment without having first considered what we're really good at into. Because if we respond to change out here without having factored in what our real strengths are, we're in danger of jeopardizing these strengths, watering them down, perhaps even destroying the source of our competitive advantage. And unfortunately, there are all sorts of examples of business that have done this. So Kodak is a great example of this, a business that had all traditionally sold products that were just technically superior. Those are competitors. So just to go back for this one, the diagram on this one. So Kodak, the products were just better, technically better than their competitors. So brand identity, that really stood out, technical superiority. Of course, everything ultimately driven by the assets. How do they create that brand identity? Well, really by the great R&D team within Kodak that led the way in all sorts of new technologies, a real groundbreaking R&D team. They led the way in digital imaging technologies. It's actually Kodak themselves that developed the first digital camera back in the 1970s, on the verge of developing a patent portfolio around it. However, Kodak got a new CEO who didn't really understand what the business was all about. He spotted a recession on the horizon, looked at the books, so the research and development department were way above the industry average and cut a huge chunk out of it. The business never recovered, never able to respond to those changes when they ultimately flowed into the market. Fujifilm, by contrast, was nowhere near as advanced as Kodak in terms of using digital imaging technologies, but had started to make some inroads, particularly using it in healthcare and engineering. And they also spotted this recession on the horizon. But as we said earlier on, they recognized the recession would come to an end. Whilst, yes, there would be a financial risk if we continue to invest in those potential future areas of growth, there'll be that competitive risk in not investing. So they kept putting money, in spite of the recession, into R&D around how they use these new technologies in healthcare and engineering. And Fujifilm still very strong in those areas. It makes all sorts of disease detection machines, X-ray machines, scanners made by Fujifilm. So we should be asking ourselves, well, how should we respond to these changes in this superior, more feasible, or just less costly manner than the competition, based on what we are really good at business and our existing assets, capability, our core strengths. So when we do see a change go out here, step 5, and then think step 6, how do we respond to these changes? Our response should be quite unique to our business. We should be building on top of our core strength, sometimes referred to as edging out from the core. So we've understood how the marketplace changes, but also what we're really good at, having gone through these first 4 steps before we think about change and think, okay, in the light of the change out here, how do we build on top of what we're already good at? Of course, there might be some things about business that aren't relevant in the future. You have to drop certain things. But these things about why we exist gives you our identity. We can really establish, amplify, as all the changes that take place out here. So some quotes to start us off on this point. So in essence, long-term winners sustain their growth by edging out from their core with natural extensions of their resources. Or as Michael Porter puts it, the prescription of growth is to deepen strategic position rather than broadening it and compromising it. So what we should really be doing is using any change that we identify out here as an opportunity to really reveal, enhance, as mentioned, amplify those aspects of our business that we're really good. And so this is referred to actually as the resource-based view, or the resource-based view of change, or the resource-based view of long-term strategy, as sometimes called. I think the best name is actually the resource-based view of change, certainly the most descriptive. I'll put the slide, the definition on it in a second, but just to explain this via the diagram first of all. So what it's all about is if we spot a change going on in the pest factors, and think, how should we look at the change? How should we perceive a change within our market? We're best off looking at that change by looking at it through the lens or through the perspective of our own internal strengths. That will help us as a unique business determine how we respond to that change. So resource-based view change through the lens of our resources, our own individual strengths. And I think you can do this even on a team basis, departmental basis. So think about use of AI. We know what works best for our team. We know the workflow processes, which tools we adopt. Hybrid working, we know how the team dynamics works, which days are people best working from home, and does it work well for everyone to work home from every day of the week, or do we need to come in or meet together? Again, we bespoke depending upon what our real strengths are within our team, department, and so on. And one of the best quotes on the resource-based view of change, someone called Professor Robert Grant from Georgetown University, explained the resource-based view, although this one is actually best explained through some examples. So put the definition on there, and then we'll look at some examples of the application of this principle. Okay, so here we go. So an externally focused orientation does not provide a secure foundation formulating long-term strategy. When the external environment is in a state of flux, the firm's own resources and capabilities may be a much more stable basis on which to define its identity. Hence, a definition of business of what it's capable of doing may offer more durable basis for strategy than definition based on the needs which the business needs to satisfy. Okay, this is slightly confusing, so I'll explain this via some examples. So our first example, Pepsi. Think about what they go at internally, bottling, supply chain management, distribution channels, agreements to supermarkets. So seeing a change in their social culture, people becoming more health conscious and less inclined to drink sweet fizzy drinks. They use those existing capabilities in bottling, supply chain management, distribution channels, agreements to supermarkets to go into the bottled water marketplace, starting Aquafina, the #1 bottled water in America. Then using the same capability, went into the food juice market, starting Tropicana, #1 fruit juice in America. And a variety of other drinks, then food products too. Now the 4th biggest food manufacturer in the world after Unilever, Kraft Heinz, and Nestle. Honda's knowledge of engines, powertrains, dealership management have allowed them to succeed in a range of different markets. It's not really defined by the markets they're in, or even the products themselves, but by their core capabilities that have allowed them to succeed in each of these various markets. 3M's knowledge of abrasives, adhesives, coatings, chemicals allowed them to succeed in the stationery, photographic industry. Sony's knowledge of new product development, marketing, advertising, product miniaturization, and then just stay within the transistor radio marketplace. So we developed these miniaturization technologies. Where else have we got a natural head start? And the final example, Apple's knowledge of hardware, software, graphic user interface, product design, allowed them to succeed in a range of different markets. And more than shown on here, Apple TV, Apple's Fitness, Vision Pro, and so on, but all based on the same core internal capabilities. So when someone good at internally, something like, are there any other products or services we've got a natural head start due to our core strengths? So just 5 examples. What I'm going to do now is ask you to identify some additional examples of business that have gone into multiple markets. So just type them into the chat. What other examples are there of business that have gone to multiple markets based upon the same core internal strengths? Anyone come up with any additional examples of where this happened? And there are scores of examples of where it's happened. So we see Dyson going into from vacuums, going to hand dryers and hair curlers and fans and so on. Disney's gone to theme parks and streaming and merchandise and so on. Also, all sorts of Google. Some businesses have gone to haven't worked. Some Google Plus, we mentioned, social media didn't work. Google Glass, of course, they have been successful in Android and Maps and so on. But what's not good at internally, are there any other products or services where you got a natural head start? People think, are there any geographical marketplaces where the business got a natural head start? It's commonly the case that customer needs in one location will foreshadow or anticipate customer needs elsewhere, thereby giving local businesses who've already started to develop the capabilities to meet those new needs a head start with those new needs then spread internationally. So this one, for example, helps us to understand how the Japanese consumer electronics industry came to be so strong. So to understand a bit more about this one, we need to know a bit more about the geography of Japan. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the geography of Japan, Japan is 80% mountainous, and therefore 80% of it is unsuitable for residential, agricultural, or industrial use. And consequently, then people tend to live in more densely populated cities, largely in coastal regions. Because of that, they live in more tightly packed homes than people of equivalent wealth in other countries. So at the start of the consumer electronics revolution, Japanese consumers tend to purchase miniaturized products. So the businesses that were unable to sufficiently miniaturize their products, no one bought their products, they went bust, went out of business. The Americans, Europeans, other businesses around the world recognize the importance of product miniaturization, but they're not forced to prioritize it to the same extent as the Japanese. So as these new needs start to spread globally, as more and more people start to take more and more consumer electronics into the homes and therefore require them to miniaturize, the Japanese who'd already developed these superior capabilities in product miniaturization started to put all these other businesses out of business. Any European businesses to survive at the time were Philips and Siemens, but they were still decimated. Philips was something like 80, 90,000 of its workforce has to downsize the world. So the Japanese move into the market with these superior capabilities. And lots of other examples of this one. So US dominance in credit cards, high street coffee shops, fast food restaurants, not only reflects US consumers' desire for convenience, but again, the spread of those trends to the rest of the world, giving those local business a head start when those trends then spread internationally. It's not just customer needs, in fact, any local conditions, even tough, unpleasant conditions, if those conditions force the business to upgrade products and processes, and those conditions spread elsewhere, the business will have had an important head start. Had someone on this course the end of last year based in Singapore, and they were saying in Singapore, they've got no natural resources to speak of, including fresh water. Because of that, they developed some sophisticated technology that converts seawater into fresh water. Of course, that technology has become much more important now internationally as a result of climate change. The Dutch are very good at irrigation, again, due to local geography there. But of course, that's become more important again because of climate change and so on. So once we know it internally, could we where else is that going to be important as a result of changes take place within the market? And it's not just tough conditions, laws and regulations. There's a new law regulation. That law might look a costly nuisance for the business to comply with again, but if that law forces the business to upgrade products and processes, that law then spreads elsewhere, the business will have an important head start. Often in environmental law, we see this. One jurisdiction will come up with a new law. Other jurisdictions will say, that looks quite sensible. We do something, not just environmental, it's often in these areas, not an exhaustive list, but often it will be one of these areas. One jurisdiction will come a new regulation in one area. Another jurisdiction will say, actually, it looks quite sensible. Perhaps we should implement something similar. So we shouldn't just look at our local regulations. What's going on in Japan? What's going on in Africa? What's going on in Europe, South America, and so on? Can we forewarn the client about these changes? So another quote in relation to this. So tough regulatory changes are not a hindrance, but an opportunity to move early to upgrade products and processes. Some regions will typically lead us in terms of their concern with social problems such as safety, environmental quality, and the like. Instead of avoiding such areas some companies do, they should be sought out. An advantage will result of the region, ultimately other nations, modify regulations to follow suit. Firms like governments are often prone to the short-term costs of dealing with tough standards and not their long-term benefits in terms of innovation. Firms point to foreign rivals without such standards having a cost advantage. Such things based on an incomplete view of how competitive advantage is created and sustained. So, once we're not good at internally, are there any other product services or geographical markets where we've got a natural head start? So step 5 is how we interpret change. Step 6 now, how do we respond to change by viewing change through the lens of our resources and then edging out from the core, building onto our core strengths. And this takes on to the final step of the course, our corporate strategy, which really is just an extension of step 6. So having understood how we're building the future, how we're edging out from the core, we're now starting about, well, where do we now want to compete in the future? Where in terms of having understood our direction of travel, how we're building the future, where do we want to compete in terms of what new products, what new services, or what new geographical markets? Before we look at this one in more depth, I just want to mention, we looked at 3 broad classifications of strategy on this course. As step those 5 lists, we look at this thing called the business strategies, when they're all about what are we doing to compete within the market, what are we doing to win customers, reduce costs, and so on. Then we look at things called functional strategy. Well, how do we do that? How do we actually execute the business strategy? So represented in the more granular terms, in practical terms, what does that look like in the form of assets? But I think our corporate strategy, which is about, well, where are we doing this? Where are we using what we're good at to business function strategy? Where in terms of what new products, new services, new geographical markets? And when you think about corporate strategy using one final diagram, please, this can be the final diagram we look at on the course. Very simple diagram as well. Gets a bit more complicated than that, but not much more complicated. So we're saying this yellow circle represents all of the opportunities that are available to everyone within the market. This is new products, new services, new geographical markets. This blue circle represents the strength of our business or the business we're analysing, and clearly we're interested in this area of overlap. So where do our strengths overlap the opportunities? But we also need to be mindful of the fact we've got competitors within our market with their own set of strengths. So the area that we really need to focus on, which is this area here, is where you've got a unique set of strengths into the opportunities, referred to as the sweet spot of opportunity. So this area on the right, we really want to leave alone. Motorsport is a fantastic, fast-growth market. We do not have the capabilities to succeed here. Our competitors do. And there are all sorts of examples of businesses that made the mistake of chasing after those opportunities on the right-hand side. So we saw Dell saw Apple's success in the MP3 market with their iPod. Clearly, Dell had all the hardware manufacturing knowledge it needed, didn't have the same software or graphical user interface knowledge, never really all that successful. It meant Google Plus and social media, Google Glass and so on. Virgin, so has gone into a lot more places that have worked, but some that haven't, gone into Virgin Cola, Virgin Vodka, and so on. The only time with everything about going up to those opportunities on the right-hand side, if that's a result of a joint venture or merge and acquisition, when we buy in necessary capabilities, probably have not got enough time to grow them organically. This area in the middle is more of a question mark. We share strengths with our competitors, all about can we act in a more effective, more timely manner than the competition. It's not often about first mover advantage. But this is really where we should be focusing our attention, because it's important to point out we're not guaranteed to succeed. If we should do everything it takes to succeed, fully we succeed if we've got all our strengths or our assets, really focus on those opportunities. So step 7, where should we compete in the future in terms of what new products, new services, new geographical markets are there where unique strengths overlap those opportunities. So let's have a recap, see where we've got to build the diagram up one final time. So pause our forces, step 1. So we understand the nature and characters of the force at work within their industry, what's important to the customers, what are our costs and so on. Step 1. Step 2, our strategy becomes what the customer needs, which ones are we prioritizing. Based on understanding of our industry characteristics and the customer needs we're prioritizing, needs the strategy we want to employ, how we want to win customers, reduce costs. Nice idea, what does that look like in the form of assets? So we need to have these assets in place. If the world never changed, we could continue to do these things in the same way forever. But we said, the final point is this, we think about how if we are second consider our strategy, that comes our brand identity. If the world never changed, we could continue to pursue the same strategies, the same assets indefinitely. But then we said the world does change, we change political, economic, social, cultural, and technological factors that impact on our 5 forces and disrupt our brand's identity, future 5 forces, future brand identity. Step 6, how do you respond to these changes? By viewing change through the lens of resource, the resource-based view of change, and then edging out from the core, building on our core strengths, and then think about, well, where, having also our direction of travel, how we're edging out from the core, where do we want to compete in the future, and what new products, new services, new geographical markets. When it comes to applying these concepts to our clients, you don't have to necessarily go through all 7 steps. Perhaps all we've got time to do, perhaps we've got 5 minutes before the client meeting, we just do a quick pause our force analysis. It's a structured way of breaking the industry down. What's important to the customers? What drives up costs? Who are their competitors? What are the barriers to entry in the marketplace? Alternatives, and so on. Or perhaps, have you got time, we add another layer of sophistication. Okay, that's great, but how is that changing? Is there a new technology lowering barriers to entry in the market? How's hybrid working impacted on them relative to competitors? How's regulation impacting on them relative to the industry forces, and so on? Doing any of these things will give you an edge over the competitors. You'll rarely think through any of these factors. They force us to think about things we wouldn't normally think about as a lawyer, and then enable us to have these more engaging conversations with the client, ask them more substantive questions, home in on key issues, uncover new issues, and ultimately align our legal advice to client strategy. I've said throughout, as well as applying this to the client, apply this concept to our own market. We think about our key asset map. What's key for that strategy? We looked at maximum resource utilization for our team department. How are pest factors impact on us relative to our competitors? How do we respond then in a unique way? Where are we on the sigmoid curve in terms of A and point B as a firm or team department and so on? what new opportunities in terms of new products, sort of geographical markets. Again, helping us develop our strategies collaboratively. So we covered a lot of ground. This run this course: pulsar forces, sigmoid curves, strategy canvas, future-fied forces, and so on. So one thing I'd like to discuss in the final breakout is and I guess the same question really. I don't know why I put them in two questions, but what have you found to be most useful? Same question really. What do you think you're going to use going forward? But again, it'd be great to hear back from the groups on this one. Okay, so that completes everything we're going to look at on the course. So say that about those online resources. And then a nice quote to finish off with. So in the years to come, we will all be in tenterhooks to waiting to see if the hyper-generative AI settles and whether or how the legal marketplace landscape changes in response. At the same time, we intend to grapple with long-lasting effects of pandemic, which might requires a redesign of the workplace and huge cultural shifts within legal firms. Those of us in the new law space are used to being at the forefront of change, but the future looks much more uncertain than it has in the past years. We simply can't predict what is awaiting us around the corner. Okay, and so we have to be aware of these changes. That completes the course. Thanks, everyone.